Blend, Part 1. Now let's begin exploring the functional side of CALM, Communicative Aikido Leadership Method, in responding to verbal attacks. There are 3 steps to executing the Stay Calm method. They are blend, neutralize, and guide. The blend step is so totally counterintuitive that it will be the most challenging step to understand, adopt, and become comfortable executing. We're going to spend some time on this step to make sure it gets fully installed. One of the reasons that blending is so difficult is because of cornerstone number 1. We all want to be understood. We are so desperate to be understood that when we are attacked, we want to immediately correct the misunderstanding so we can recover this important psychological need. So instead of taking the time to blend and neutralize and earn the right to guide, we jump straight to the guide step in an effort to be understood ourselves. This only encourages the attacker to push or pull even harder. What we resist will persist. The reason I'm drilling this point into the ground and hopefully into your subconscious is that in just a little while we're going to look at some of the language structures that you would hear if you were observing a calm practitioner blending with a verbal attack. The risk is that you will take these language bits and memorize them thinking, now I'll be able to keep other people from hurting me just by saying these lines. Nothing could be further from the truth. Do not confuse the language of calm for the lesson of calm. Listen to this section at least twice, read or listen to a few of the books that are referenced in this chapter, and find a partner to practice with so when you face a verbal confrontation, you can stay calm. Don't just memorize these lines thinking that will suffice. Remember Mad Magazine's snappy answers to stupid questions? You are likely to sound like that if you simply memorize the responses and ignore the core principles that this work represents. Your words are secondary. You will say what needs to be said in the moment of the attack if you are committed to Tenkan, to turning and seeing things from your opponent's point of view. If you'll make the point of mentally stepping up, turning around, and seeing the situation from the other person's perspective, no matter what you say, it will come from a place of wanting to partner with your would-be opponent and discover a solution together. Final warning. You may find yourself hearing these attack phrases and thinking to yourself in sentences that start with, "Yeah, but they're wrong," or, "If they said that, I'd tell them." If so, you are attempting to guide the attacker before you have blended. Go back and listen again to the beginning of this chapter and come back to this section with the intent to execute a true Tenkan. Not to say that you must agree with your attacker, but that you must see the situation the way they see it, without making them right or wrong, by simply observing, not evaluating. The majority of overt, violent verbal attacks are the end result of escalating covert attacks. It is important to know that many times, when people are verbally attacking you in a covert fashion, they may not be consciously aware of the fact that they are in the beginning stages of creating a conflict scenario. They are often playing out life scenarios that since childhood they have been modeling from the example of adults and are completely unaware of the feelings and unmet needs that are driving them to threaten or attack. These life scenarios are actually stories that people have concocted in their minds about what your actions must mean. Human beings are meaning-making machines. We observe a behavior, hear a particular string of words, or read something, and in the flash of a shutting synapse, we make that action or message into a meaningful story that creates an emotional response. We then link this emotional response, driven by our assumed true story, to the facts we observed, and make the entire string of observed facts and imagined story into our version of reality. From here, it is only a small jump to conclusions that will have us taking action towards others as if the story were real, making derogatory comments, hinting at accusations, and throwing snide remarks around, just as if the make-believe story had actually occurred. This becomes the starting point for many of the covert verbal attacks that we encounter. Like coming into a movie in the middle, we are missing key pieces of the plot that went on in our attacker's head, and we are just as confused and unsure as to why this person is behaving in this manner as if we'd missed part of the storyline. Because we did. So as you find yourself encountering situations like those in the following sample attack patterns, begin analyzing the motives behind the attacks, as it will serve you well to be curious about the real story. In being curious, we are able to maintain an objective viewpoint and avoid being sucked into a storyline we know nothing about. Types of verbal attacks. One of the most critical components of the Stay Calm method is the skill to recognize various types of verbal attacks. In the following examples, I will put stress on words or parts of words that need emphasis to show that they are part of an attack. I must give much credit to Suzette Haydn Elgin, Ph.D. She is a linguist specializing in verbal self-defense, which she defines in a series of books written during the 80s, starting with The Gentle Art of Verbal Self-Defense. She has proposed a set of structures she calls the verbal attack patterns, or VAPs, of the English language. There are 6 patterns from that set that we will review in the Stay Calm method. They are, number 1, if you really X, you would or wouldn't Y. Number 2, if you really X, you wouldn't want to Y. Number 3, don't you even care? Number 4, even an X should Y. Number 5, everyone understands why you X. And number 6, a person who X, Y. My analysis of these attacks and my proposed responses differ from Dr. Elgin's in various ways, but I could not have developed them for the Stay Calm method without the solid foundation she has provided. I'm sure many of us can relate to hearing something like this from someone as young as 6 or 7. If you really loved me, you'd buy me a computer like all the other kids have. This is a classic verbal attack pattern that can be modified to fit nearly any environment. Again, I'm putting extra emphasis on the words that create meaning beyond the actual words spoken. As an example, if you really were committed to this relationship, you wouldn't. If you really wanted to be promoted, you'd. If you really had the motivation to support our team, you'd. If you really wanted to lose weight, you wouldn't. And so on and so forth. This simple but camouflaged verbal attack is really pretty elementary. But how many times have you or parents you know gone down this rat hole in response to that 6-year-old's tactic? Dad: oh, come on, Alex, not all the kids have computers. They do too, you just don't want to get me one. Now I know Mackenzie doesn't have one. She does too, up in her room, you just don't know anything. All right, young man, that's enough out of you. You go to your room and stay there until you can act like a decent person. Game, set, and match. Child goes running off, crying, and slams his bedroom door, but Dad's the loser in this one, having let the 6-year-old get away with one of the most transparent yet easily missed verbal attack sequences in our culture. The if you really X, then you would or wouldn't Y attack is based on the fact that most of us, when faced with this linguistic sequence, often take the bait, which is the Y in the attack. We miss entirely the child's hidden agenda, which we will call the presupposition, X, which preceded the bait. By ignoring the presupposition, we admit by default that its premise is true. When the child says, if you really loved me, you'd buy me a computer, the presupposition is that Dad doesn't really love him. Instead of finding out what that means, Dad takes the bait and unwittingly finds himself vindicating the child's presupposition. Not bad for a 6-year-old. So in using the Stay Calm method, Dad would blend with the initial presupposition and ignore the bait entirely. Child: if you really loved me, you'd buy me a computer like all the other kids have. Dad: wow, it sounds like you're thinking I don't love you. When did you start thinking that? When you called me a knucklehead in front of Uncle Tommy, that's when. By blending with the child, Dad has successfully brought the real issue out in the open and can discuss this with his child and work to resolve the upset with appropriate compassion and care. Great, so we've gained some confidence in dealing with 6-year-olds. What about the world of adults slinging more complex verbal daggers our way? Ever hear something like this? Manager: if you were really committed to this department, you wouldn't even want to turn these reports in looking like this. Okay, now we're moving into a more complex and sophisticated attack. The presupposition is clear based on the previous attack pattern: you aren't really committed to this department, but additional layers of presupposition have been added. Number 1, the report you turned in is less than satisfactory. And number 2, you not only knew that, but intended to do a poor job. This is tougher to blend with because the temptation to take the bait, the quality of the report, is so great that the topics of our commitment to the department and our commitment to doing quality work are likely never to see the light of day. Let's look at a possible blend sequence to turn this attack into a solution-oriented exchange between manager and employee. We will not go past the blend step here, so be prepared for a cliffhanger. Manager: if you were really committed to this department, you wouldn't even want to turn these reports in looking like this. Employee: it sounds like you're frustrated with me and need my commitment to our department. I want to satisfy your expectations for high quality. What exactly are you requesting of me? Manager: I am frustrated. This report is missing the stats regarding turnover that I had specifically asked to be included in each weekly report. This blend is handled well by employee. Manager can tell that employee is seeking to understand the way the manager is feeling and wants to find out exactly where the breakdown occurred. By not taking the bait and becoming defensive, employee has provided clear evidence that he or she is indeed committed to the department and wants to provide complete reports that meet with the manager's expectations for quality. So let's discuss the specifics of this blend sequence. The first component that must be in place is employee maintaining control of his or her vocal intonations. Our instinct to defend can be so strong that in our attempt to discover the other person's perspective, we can end up sounding sarcastic, condescending, or patronizing. Listen to this. I'll say employee's response to the manager's attack as a string of sarcastic comments, and you can hear how ineffective this would be. Manager: if you were really committed to this department, you wouldn't even want to turn these reports in looking like this. Employee: it sounds like you're frustrated with me and need my commitment to our department. I want to satisfy your expectations for high quality. What exactly are you requesting of me? You can hear how ineffective that would be, yes? Then practice saying employee's response with a sincere desire to empathize with the feelings of the other person and a very real attempt to discover the source of the actual problem. I'll say it with a level of compassion and empathy that would probably be responded to favorably, even if it were said to you that way. Manager: if you were really committed to this department, you wouldn't even want to turn these reports in looking like this. Employee: it sounds like you're frustrated with me and need my commitment to our department. I want to satisfy your expectations for high quality. What exactly are you requesting of me? Practicing these responses, using scenarios that you actually face in your life, especially on tape or using a digital recorder, will help immensely and prepare you for the next time you face a verbal attack. In the last example, I made no effort to explain the rest of the sequence, how employee would guide manager to understand his or her own perspective or provide a reasonable solution for the breakdown. This is because I want to provide examples of people moving from the attack to a place of neutrality by blending with their attackers. Once neutral ground is reached, the guide step will have a much better chance of producing favorable results. One of the most powerful first responses to a verbal attack is to identify the feelings that our attacker might be experiencing. When we make the effort to discover how our attacker is feeling, this short-circuits our attacker, starts to bring him back to a decision-making mode, and helps him regain control over his prefrontal cortex. This heightens his ability to choose instead of reacting based on learned patterns of verbal abuse. The calm dad tuned into his son's feelings of not being loved and found a way to achieve neutrality. The employee confirmed that she had blended with the manager when the manager agreed that she was frustrated. In the next chapter, we will provide a helping hand in acquiring the skills exhibited by the dad and by the employee in the sample attack patterns we have discussed in Part 1. Once we have the tools for understanding our attacker's real feelings and unmet needs, we will return for Part 2 of the blend step.